I crouched in the guest bedroom closet of our lake cabin, my knees aching from the cramped position, the stale scent of cedar insulation and wintered blankets pressing against my face. I'd been in the dark for almost an hour, listening to the soft echoes of her footsteps overhead, light, deliberate, unhurried. She had no idea I was here. That fact should have made me feel in control. It didn't. Not yet. 2 days earlier, I had opened our shared notes app to check an old list I'd made of things to fix at the cabin: a loose banister, a dripping faucet. Instead, I saw something new under recently deleted, cabin packing list. It had been wiped, then edited, then renamed. I restored it without much thought, assuming it was something she meant to keep. But what I found wasn't for me. Cologne, bring Rick's? Black silk robe. Whiskey, not the smoky one. Second toothbrush. Extra charger. Noise machine. She hadn't packed those things when she went with me. I remember just staring at that list for a long minute. Then I checked our shared calendar. Her weekend away had been originally titled Weekend with R. Now it just read Wellness Solo. A quiet switch, tucked away in a sea of digital clutter she probably assumed I never reviewed. That was the moment the denial began to rot. I didn't confront her. No questions. No accusations. Just a calm mention of a sudden business trip on the same weekend. She smiled, said she'd use the time to journal and reset. I nodded and even packed a bag in front of her, drove to a colleague's house, waited until night, then circled back here. The cabin was ours, jointly bought after our 3rd anniversary. Rustic wood siding, high windows, a stone fireplace we never learned to use right. She loved it for the quiet. I loved it because she did. Now I was inside, crouched in the shadows, waiting to confirm what I already knew. Footsteps moved across the upstairs floor. Her voice followed, low, muffled, then higher, laughing. Then came another voice. Male. Too familiar. Smooth in that casual, practiced way. I didn't catch the words. I didn't need to. It was him. Rick. My stomach nodded. Not with rage, not yet, but with a cold, sharp clarity. Rick wasn't just some man. He was someone I'd once coached through a divorce. Someone who'd sat at my table, in my guest room, when his life had fallen apart. He'd looked up to me then. Called me the most grounded guy he knew. I'd introduced him to my wife at a charity event 3 years ago. The way he looked at her now clicked into place like a puzzle I hadn't realized was missing a piece. I stayed silent. I listened. Her laugh hadn't sounded that alive in years. Not with me. Not even close. I glanced around the room. Her scarf was draped over the chair where I usually dropped my coat. One of our wedding photos sat on the nightstand. The glass had cracked, a long diagonal fracture splitting us neatly down the middle. I remember taking that photo. I just told her a joke. She was laughing, real and unguarded. I used to know how to do that. Now she was doing it with him. A floorboard creaked. Footsteps approached. A door opened. Light spilled into the hallway. I stepped out of the closet slowly, controlled, as if my heart wasn't thundering in my chest. Rick froze halfway through the doorway, a glass of something dark in his hand. His eyebrows twitched as his brain registered me. Then, unbelievably, he smirked. "Hi," he said, casual as anything. "I think I know you from somewhere." I held his gaze, voice level. "Yeah, you do. I'm the husband of the woman you've been entertaining for the past hour." The smirk flickered. Not gone, just twitching, uncertain. And then came silence, heavy, sharp, real. He didn't say anything at first, neither did I. Rick stood in the hallway, a glass of bourbon in his hand, eyes scanning my face like he hadn't quite processed what he was seeing. I watched his posture shift, from casual confidence to wary tension. That smirk he opened with? Already dying. He tilted his head slightly. "Look, man, this is the part where you stop talking," I said quietly. "Unless you think there's something I haven't figured out yet." He blinked, mouth tightening. "I didn't know she was still with you." I didn't flinch. "You lived in my house, Rick. You ate at my table. You met her in my kitchen. You knew exactly what this was." That shut him up. For a second, we just stood there in that narrow hallway of wood paneling and old photos, the place where my wife and I had once imagined growing old, now just another scene of quiet ruin. "I'll go," he said. I nodded. "You'll do that." He walked past me, careful not to brush shoulders. He left his drink behind. The front door opened with a creak and closed without a slam. He didn't look back. I didn't follow. I didn't want to see his car leave. I just stood there and listened to the silence settle back into the house. A silence I had known well for years. This time, at least, it was honest. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and sat at the table where we used to play cards late into the night. I didn't need to search drawers or scroll through files. I already had what I needed. The note. The calendar change. The voice I recognized. Footsteps creaked above. She was still upstairs. Hadn't heard the door. Probably thought Rick was still inside, in the bathroom, or looking for something. A minute passed, then another. Her steps moved down the stairs, slow, unbothered. I stayed where I was. She walked into the kitchen, still smoothing her hair, still in the silk robe from the packing list I wasn't supposed to see. When she saw me, she froze mid-step. The mask didn't slip. It shattered. "You're back early," she said after too long a pause. I looked up at her. Had a change of plans. She didn't sit. Didn't speak. Her eyes darted past me, toward the hallway, probably wondering why Rick hadn't warned her. Why he hadn't said goodbye. I reached over and tapped my phone, lighting the screen. I already had the note open. Cabin packing list, fully restored, untouched. I turned it toward her. "You forgot to permanently delete it." Her expression didn't change, but her body did. Her hands went to her sides. Her breathing went shallow. And still, not a single tear. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she said. "But you were fine with me never finding out," I said. "That's the part you were careful about." She didn't deny it. Just stood there like someone watching a flood approach, hoping it would veer another direction before it reached her. "I never meant for it to go this far." I nodded slowly. "That's what Rick said too?" Her face twitched, but she recovered quickly. "So you talked to him?" "Briefly." Her silence then was the first honest thing she'd given me in weeks. I stood up and poured a second glass of water, set it on the table across from me. Didn't say a word. Eventually she sat down. We both stared at the glass between us like it was a ticking clock. And just like that, the storm wasn't coming. It was already here. She sat across from me like a stranger waiting for a train, not knowing which direction it would come from. Her hands stayed in her lap, fingers laced tightly, the same way she held them during hard conversations in the past. But this wasn't one of those. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a marital misfire. This was collapse. I didn't speak first. I let the silence do the heavy work. Let it stretch and harden until it scraped against the walls of the room like frost. When she finally opened her mouth, her voice was so low I barely caught it. "How long have you known?" "Long enough to be tired," I said. "But not long enough to stop being angry." She nodded like she understood, but I saw it in her eyes. She still didn't think this was over. She still believed in some version of herself that could talk her way through this. She was already assembling her justifications, her measured half-confessions, her selective regrets. "I didn't plan for it to happen," she offered. I tilted my head. "You edited the calendar. You deleted the note. You packed for someone else." Her mouth opened, then closed. She blinked slowly. "I meant I didn't go looking for it." "That's comforting," I said. "It just showed up on our porch one day and fell into you." She looked away, jaw clenched. "It's not just about him." "I know." She looked back, surprised. "You do?" I nodded. "This wasn't spontaneous combustion. It was rot. I just didn't smell the mold until it was in the walls." That gave her pause, and for a moment I thought we might finally get something real. But instead of honesty, she gave me tactics. "I didn't feel seen," she said. I gave a humorless laugh. "And Rick did? The guy who used to ask me what kind of cologne to wear to interviews." She flinched. "There were 1,000 ways to say you were lonely," I continued. "This wasn't one of them. This was silence with teeth." The glass of water sat between us, untouched. She stared at it like it might offer a reflection that made sense. "I kept waiting for us to get better," she said finally. "But you just disappeared in plain sight." I looked at her. "So you brought someone else into the house you said you needed space in?" "I thought I was already alone," she whispered. The cruelty wasn't in her words. It was in how calmly she said them. "You never gave me a chance to fix what you wouldn't name," I said. "You buried the problem, then blamed me for not digging." She said nothing, just folded inward. I could have shouted. I could have hurled accusations, demands, all the emotional detritus of betrayal. But what good would that have done? What she did was already done. The only thing left to see now was how she behaved when cornered by truth, not rage. Eventually she said, "Are you going to leave me?" I laughed, sharp, involuntary. Leave you? You left months ago. I just showed up late to the funeral. She didn't cry. I noticed that. Not out of coldness, out of calculation. I guess we should talk about what happens next, she said. Already did, I said, pulling an envelope from the drawer and placing it on the table. I had the lawyer draft a separation agreement 3 days ago. I've already signed. Your copy is inside. Her eyes flicked down to the envelope like it might bite her. You're serious? I'm not here for theater, I said. She opened the envelope slowly, like it might contain something more devastating than the truth she'd already heard. In a way it did. It contained finality, not anger, not negotiation, just the unmistakable sound of a door closing without a slam. She read it quietly, the sound of paper sliding over paper the only sound in the room. When she looked back up, her eyes were glassy, but still dry. You already knew before today, didn't you? I nodded. I knew the moment I saw the packing list. A beat passed. Then she said, almost gently, You waited until now? I wanted to see if you'd lie to my face or let it speak for itself. And? You lied, I said. She looked down, and stayed there. She didn't touch the envelope. Not right away. It just sat between us on the table, full of cleanly typed truths she hadn't expected to arrive so soon, or at all. She kept her hands in her lap like a schoolgirl waiting for a verdict. I didn't expect you to make a move this fast, she said finally, her voice small but composed. I didn't answer immediately. I wanted her to hear the silence. Let her sit in it long enough to feel that I was done reacting the way I used to, measured patience, emotional compromise. That man had left the room the moment Rick smirked at me in our hallway. After a long breath, I said, I've had time to think. She looked down, then back at the envelope. Her fingers hovered near it, not quite touching. You were serious about leaving, she said. Her voice carried the faint disbelief of someone who never expected the floor to actually fall through. I didn't blink. I was serious the minute you stopped pretending to be someone else. That landed harder than anything I'd said so far. She didn't answer. Her eyes dropped to the edge of the table. I watched her thumb find the corner of the envelope and begin folding it back and forth, slow and repetitive. A nervous motion. The kind you do when you're trying to stay calm while drowning. I'm not trying to make excuses, she said at last, still not looking at me. She always did that, offer not quite apologies before the truth had room to speak. I didn't let her finish whatever version of herself she was about to recite. But you're hoping they'll sound like reasons. This time, she looked up. Not defensive. Just tired. Maybe she realized there wasn't a safe version of this conversation anymore. I never planned for any of this to happen, she said. I didn't go looking for it. That line again. The one people always fall back on when they don't want to admit they made a choice. You didn't plan it, I said. But you revised the calendar. You deleted the note. You packed like you weren't expecting me to ever know. Her lips parted slightly, maybe to offer another angle, maybe to pretend there was a moral loophole. But nothing came out. She closed her mouth again and turned away slightly. You think I didn't feel it? I said. The difference. The emptiness. I just refused to name it before you gave it form. She nodded slowly. There was no argument left in her, but not much honesty either, just the exhausted defense of someone who'd only ever been brave enough to disappear. After another pause, she said, I thought you didn't care anymore. You stopped looking at me like I mattered. That would have cut me, once. Maybe it still should have. But now it just felt like part of the pattern. A deflection dressed as vulnerability. I stopped looking, I said. Because every time I did, you looked away first. She didn't respond. Just kept folding that envelope flap like it was holding her together. I'll go to my sister's, she said after a long silence. You should. She stood slowly. I didn't move. She didn't try to touch me, didn't ask what came next. We both knew. There was nothing to salvage. Only debris to avoid stepping on while we left. At the door, she paused, then turned halfway toward me. Her voice came smaller than before. Do you still hate me? I looked at her. Not with contempt, not with pity, just clarity. I never hated you, I said. That would have made this easier. She nodded once, eyes unreadable, and stepped outside. The door clicked shut with that deliberate softness she always used when she didn't want to wake me. I stood alone in the kitchen, the cabin now stripped of noise, of performance, of denial. It was the first honest moment that place had seen in years. I didn't pour a drink. I didn't scream. I just walked to the bookshelf, pulled out one of the hardcovers we'd once picked out together, and sat down with it unopened in my hands. My fingers found something taped behind the inner flap, a small, black USB drive I didn't recognize. I stared at it, pulse rising. But I didn't plug it in yet. Not tonight. The next morning, I woke before the light had fully broken. It was quiet in the cabin, the kind of quiet that comes after a collapse. No tension left, just wreckage. I made coffee, sat at the table, and opened the legal folder again, reviewing each clause like I was reading the story of someone else's ruin. But it was mine. Every sentence was clean, final, and necessary. By noon, I had packed her things into a row of labeled boxes. Not as revenge. As a boundary. She'd already taken what mattered most to her, her justifications, her secrets, and whatever version of herself let her sleep through it all. The first ripple hit that afternoon. A call from Jenna, one of the mutual friends we'd once vacationed with, shared holidays with. Her tone was careful, overly light. "I just heard she's staying with her sister," Jenna said. "I didn't want to get in the middle, but are you okay?" It was the kind of question you ask when you already know the answer but want to pretend you don't. I told her I was fine. Calm. Focused. That was true enough. "You know," Jenna added after a pause, "she's been under a lot of pressure this past year, trying to hold everything together." That's when I knew. Jenna had known. Maybe not the whole thing, but enough. Enough to look the other way, enough to stay silent at dinners while they exchanged glances I hadn't yet learned to interpret. I didn't bother asking if she'd ever warned her. I knew the answer. "I hope you're both being kind to yourselves," Jenna said. That line nearly made me laugh, the polished neutrality of someone who wanted to be liked by the aftermath. "I hope you'll think carefully about who you protect," I said, and ended the call. I didn't hear from her again. The lawyer moved quickly. Too quickly for her. She called 2 days later to ask why her name had been removed from the cabin title submission. I explained that I had anticipated this and filed under an asset protection clause tied to the original down payment, which had come entirely from my premarital account. "You knew this was coming," she said. "I didn't know when," I replied. "But I stopped pretending it wouldn't." She didn't fight it immediately, but I saw the shift. The legal phase had begun. She wanted to win something back, even if she'd already lost the thing that mattered. Then came the financial audit. My accountant found several recurring cash withdrawals from our joint line over the past 9 months. Each small enough to avoid setting off alerts, but steady, consistent, cautious. When I asked her, she claimed they were for personal expenses. When pressed, she said she was helping her sister. When I checked the timing, it aligned exactly with her weekends away. It was never about the money. It was about the lies she layered on top of it. Rick hadn't just been a mistake. He'd been financed with shared resources. Our name paid for his presence. The social fabric frayed faster than I expected. One couple invited me to lunch, alone. Another canceled a joint dinner with a note. "We just think it's best to give you both space." Some friendships fractured. Some revealed their rot. A few remained. The ones who didn't flinch when I stopped pretending. That week, I came back to the cabin to clear the last of my documents. The air felt different, not haunted, just empty. Like a theater after the actors have gone home. I moved slowly through each room, taking what was mine, old notebooks, a favorite mug, the tool set I kept under the stairs. I hesitated in the hallway, the place I'd stood when Rick walked past me like a man waking up inside a trap. That night I sat on the edge of the bed with the small USB drive in my hand. I hadn't forgotten about it. I just needed to be strong enough not to flinch. I plugged it in. What came up was exactly what I feared, and something I hadn't expected. Not just images, not just angles, recordings. Rick had recorded them. In the bedroom, in the kitchen, in the car, and in the hallway. The same hallway where I had faced him. Only the timestamp told me this recording had been made weeks earlier. In it, she said, "He still doesn't suspect a thing," Rick replied. "You're sure he's not just waiting to catch you?" She laughed. "If he knew, he'd have done something by now. He doesn't see me anymore." It landed like glass in my throat, not because it confirmed the lie, but because it confirmed something deeper. She hadn't just betrayed me. She'd measured me, calculated my blindness, wagered that my silence meant absence. She'd been wrong. The morning after I watched the videos, I drove straight to my attorney's office. I gave him the USB drive without commentary. He didn't ask questions, he just said, We'll hold it. We won't lead with it. But if she contests anything, it's our insurance. I nodded. That was enough. The legal process moved quickly. She didn't challenge the separation agreement outright, but she responded through her lawyer asking to renegotiate access to the cabin and to revisit the financial division. It was obvious she'd been advised to take a swing while she still had a narrative. We responded with a full financial timeline, joint withdrawals matched against her travel records and the cabin's smart lock entries. The pattern was obvious. She had been siphoning funds to maintain her other life, even using the emergency savings account she once insisted we set aside together. That detail changed tone in the negotiations. Her lawyer's emails turned from confident to cautious. She didn't want the full story entered into court records. That told me everything I needed to know. Social fallout spread next. I didn't talk about what happened publicly, but word traveled anyway. People asked careful questions. How are things? Or, I heard there's been a change. I never confirmed or denied anything. I let them sit in the discomfort of not knowing. What surprised me wasn't who stopped calling. It was who reached out. 2 people, both men I hadn't heard from in months, emailed to say they'd seen things they didn't understand at the time. Conversations, body language. One admitted he'd seen Rick at the cabin driveway last fall and assumed I was out hiking. He'd said nothing because it wasn't my business. Now he wanted to apologize. I told him he didn't need to. He wasn't responsible. But I remembered his silence. I wouldn't forget it. That week, I cleaned out the last of the city house. I left behind nothing. No shared furniture. No leftovers from a life that wasn't mine anymore. The only thing I kept was the marriage certificate, now folded and filed behind the legal dissolution papers. 2 days later, I received a letter from her lawyer asking for a neutral resolution discussion in private. It wasn't a legal maneuver. It was an attempt at damage control. She wanted to avoid her image being caught in the shadow of her decisions. I declined. My position was already established. I didn't need another conversation where words were used to reshape what had already been done. That weekend, I went back to the cabin. I fixed the railing on the porch, repaired the back screen, and repainted the bedroom window trim, things that had been ignored for years. There was nothing poetic about it. It just needed to be done. In the guest room drawer, I found the cracked wedding photo again. I hadn't moved it. The glass was still broken, the fracture running across both our faces. I didn't throw it out. I left it where it was, not for sentiment, but for accuracy. I plugged the USB drive into my laptop 2 weeks after the legal paperwork was finalized. I waited that long on purpose. I wanted distance. I wanted to be sure I wouldn't misread what I saw just to satisfy my anger. There were 4 folders, each marked by dates, all within the past 8 months. The first one opened with a standard camera angle, low mounted, probably behind the cabin's bookshelf or a lamp. Rick had set it up himself. She had to have known. You don't speak that freely if you think no one's listening. I watched for a few minutes. The conversations weren't about passion. They were about logistics, schedules, stories to keep straight, plans for what came next, assuming I stayed blind. She poured a drink and sat on the edge of the bed. Rick asked, "You sure he's not catching on?" She answered, "Even if he suspects something, he won't act. He doesn't like conflict. He'll just wait it out." That was enough. I didn't need to hear more. That wasn't a betrayal. That was a profile. One I'd let her build by default. I closed the video and backed away from the desk. No rage. No need for confrontation. Just a decision. I deleted the files. Not out of forgiveness. Out of discipline. I already knew what I needed. I didn't want this living in my devices, in my thoughts, or in the days ahead. The next day, I boxed up the last of her things at the cabin. A scarf in the closet, a few books, a set of wine glasses she'd picked out 2 years ago. I taped the box shut and left it on the porch with a message sent through the attorney. All of it's outside. It'll be there for 48 hours. She didn't reply. Later that week, I met with a contractor to talk about renovating the cabin's main room. The walls still echoed sometimes. I wasn't looking for a symbolic reset. I just wanted something that didn't keep the shape of our history. That Sunday, while clearing out the guest room closet, I found a book she'd once asked me to read. Inside was a photo I hadn't seen in years. We looked younger. She was laughing into my shoulder. My hand was on her back. There was a deep crease down the middle from being tucked too tightly between the pages. I stood there a moment, looking at it, not with longing, just with understanding. That moment had existed. But it didn't exist anymore. I took the photo outside, dropped it into the fire pit, and lit a match. It curled, resisted, then darkened and vanished without drama. That night I made dinner. 1 plate. 1 glass. I sat outside on the deck and listened to the wind push through the trees. There was no closure. Just a clean edge where something used to be. I didn't feel healed. But I didn't feel lost either. That was enough.